Hi everybody, my name is Nicole Sanders and I am going to talk a little bit about how to motivate our students in writing. We are going to focus on how we can use writing in a social context, why purpose and audience is so important to motivate students, examples of challenging tasks that have been proven to motivate students as well, and what's our role? How do we continue to motivate? So I'm basing this off of my grad school class on teaching writing, best practices in writing instruction. And so I've taken some of the findings from these authors and I've put them with things that I do in my classroom. So the number one way to get kids motivated is put writing in a social context. So in Best Practices for Writing Instruction, the author explains writing in schools is usually a solitary behavior through which a student can demonstrate what he or she has learned for later evaluation. But in the real world, most writing is social. There's collaboration, there's building upon each other, there's talking through things in a written way. So let me give you some examples. So one really great way to teach students writing in a collaborative way is to give them a project where they have to design something, a book, a newsletter, a pamphlet, a field guide, and each of them take on a different component. Together, they make the final product. So they must work together to make sure that their writing is really of quality. But then they get to make decisions on who's doing what, and then at the end, do they all make a good combination for a newsletter? So this example I did with my students here, we made cave paintings, and then we made a newsletter, which we used a digital format to have with it, so that teachers, parents, fellow kids that came to the exhibition could also read about the writing, and then this was also used to help them talk about it as a group. I can give you an example of that. So right here we have the Lascaux Caves by one group, and they were able to decide what they were going to talk about, and then how it was going to be laid out. And then at the end, they decided to add this part about signing a petition for the caves. The next way you can use writing in a social context is through elevator pitches. So in this instance, connected to the same project, the students were asked to write an elevator pitch to convince their fellow team to choose their panel or their hall. The elevator pitch looks like this. So it would be as if you were in an elevator with someone and you needed to convince them by the 5th floor of something that you want them to join you in. So they start by getting the listener's attention, do a fact that really brings them in, describe more, and by the end, you're inviting them to help you. So the idea of this is it's small acts of persuasion, but it's fast. And students have to be concise because you only have 5 floors to convince them. So that was a fun way of making writing social and authentic. Another great way to make this writing a social thing is through critique. So we could go deep into this for hours talking about tuning protocols, effective peer feedback. One that I'm going to focus on a little bit is silent critique, which you might be thinking, wait, silent? That means that they're not talking, how is that social? But in fact, there are ways in silence that kids can communicate with each other. So the students for their newsletters all had to write informative paragraphs. And we went over drafts and steps and process about how to do that. So here you can see a student has her outline, and the outline was different colors. A different color represents the topic sentence, facts, details to prove your topic sentence, and so on. And then their rough drafts are on the side in their journal. So they were asked to leave their journal open, and then we took turns. So first we walked around giving warm feedback, and then we did cool feedback. But we talked a lot about what type of feedback is good feedback. Kids always go to like penmanship and grammar, things that are really not going to get them to improve their writing. And then talking more about, is the writing repetitive? Do you have 3 facts? Are you proving that these facts prove your topic sentence? Do you have a topic sentence? And then also writing good topic sentence, not, I am going to tell you about. These students are 6th graders, so now we need to start getting into more elaborate sentences, especially in their topic sentences. And the kids love whiteboards. Anytime you can bring in whiteboards to things, the novelty of that is just so much fun. We also talked about really good sentence starters when we are giving feedback that's uncomfortable, like, I wonder if you could. Another one could be, maybe next time you, have you thought about, right? Versus, no offense, but, right? Or I like this, but, and we talked about why those are so mean and they can come off so harsh. We even talked about how we say that to each other in our everyday and how we could improve as friends by using words like maybe or have you thought of instead, and we might make better friends that way too. So one thing at my school that we have really, really focused on the last few years is Kagan cooperative learning structures. So basically, these are structures that allow kids to all be talking at the same time, in pairs, and the talking is focused on the topic. So rather than asking a question and waiting for kids to raise their hand, and the same kids raise their hand, and you pick from those kids, and they answer, and that means 1 out of maybe 20 kids knows the answer, and you know that. You can actually have discussions where kids are answering the question to their partner, and so kids are held way more accountable, and at any one time, 50% of the kids are trying and thinking versus one kid answering for everybody else. So for my fellow teachers, I came up with a list of specific Kagan structures that require writing. So, for instance, I'll write round robin. You would write maybe a sentence or two, a sentence starter for maybe a story, or, this is a history class, so maybe we're trying to get everything we know about a specific topic down. And we start writing, and then we pass it. And the next person in the group has to continue on with what they were writing, and they can't repeat anything that was written before. So that's an example of a social way of writing. Not to mention that Rally Robin is a really good way to get kids talking and talking about their writing. So for instance, have kids make a list of something and then say go, and then they bounce back. So, this student will give one thing on their list, and then this student will give one thing on their list, and then back and forth, and then you can make it a competition of who can come up with the most things on their list. So then kids get really motivated to write as much as they can so that they can share. So another thing that I feel truly passionate about is purpose. That if you're going to give students writing, the final product should not die on your desk. It really should be something that at least the kids believe is for an authentic audience. So what I always like to think of when I'm assigning these tasks are who might want to hear this, having an audience that could be parents, could be a younger grade, could be teachers from another class. It could be, the 5th graders teaching the 4th graders. But you have to have that authentic audience, and then it becomes that more valuable because people are really going to be reading it, and these people are important to me. It doesn't actually have to be a real audience. Our authors go into detail about it could be imagined audiences. For instance, right now my students are coming up with their own Sumerian city-state, and they're going to have to present their plans to a panel of elders from Sumer. Now, obviously, we're not going to have a panel of elders. We may have, I would like to have some teachers come in, pretend to be the Sumerian elders. But as of now, that imaginary audience is enough to motivate them. And then I can worry about the authentic audience as it gets closer. Another strategy to motivate students is to give students challenging tasks. Sometimes we think as teachers, they're not going to be able to handle it. But realistically, they will rise to the challenge if they feel like it's authentic enough. So the authors give a really good concrete example. Instead of summarize the story, right, rewrite the story. Change the protagonist or change the setting and rewrite it from a different perspective, perhaps. That's a really, really fun way to, one, check comprehension, the ability to summarize, but then it gets it deeper. So this was actually a study that said that third graders actually prefer the high challenge over the low challenge reading and writing tasks. And a hint of what that looks like, it usually requires more than one day of work and multiple paragraphs. The way that I like to structure it in my classroom is that I don't necessarily spend the week on the writing. We break it up. So maybe we'll do a day of the outline, and then we'll do something else in history. And then the next day we'll process a little bit, and then we'll maybe turn it into a rough draft. And then a couple of days later, we'll do the critique, and then perhaps the final product unless we need more drafts. But rather than making it one long chunk, it's nice to break it up because then kids come in refreshed about the topic. So the role of the teacher, obviously, is important. So while collaboration is important, it's also important to give students some individual writing time as well. Don't feel like I always have to create these social experiences for kids. Letting kids just reflect or write is also important, especially for the kids that really thrive in that way. One thing with writing that tends to stop motivation is the grading. So the authors mentioned that using portfolios is an effective way to help kids keep that self-efficacy, to keep wanting to work, because they can see progress over time and they can write reflections on their writing and focus on one to improve later on of their choice, versus really spending time focusing on, well, you wrote this, you got a grade, you're never looking at it again. So portfolio is a really great way to improve that self-efficacy. Also, acknowledging that writing is hard. So I wrote Celebrating Grit because we need to acknowledge to our kids that writing is hard, that it's not necessarily going to come easy. It really doesn't come easy for any of us, that we have to learn how to do it and we have to practice a lot. And to go along with that, a lot of teachers have this philosophy of, I don't want to constrain the kids with structure, and therefore I'm not going to teach process. I'm just going to say, go write. But then they're never going to improve their writing. Not to mention that kids and adults need structure. If you leave room for creativity and choice, structure can be a very important thing. And my biggest opinion, which not necessarily in the book, but I believe, is read their rough drafts. So rather than waiting for that final product and giving them a grade, read, assess, conference with the kids prior, because that's when the learning happens. When the grade comes, they're going to see their grade and then they're going to put it in their cubby or somewhere and they're never going to see it again. But if you actually spend time showing them how they can improve their work before the grade, they're going to rise to that challenge. So to sum up, I recommend to motivate students through social writing, give students purpose, give students complex writing tasks, teach process, and use portfolios. Thank you very much.